The first thing I felt when I stepped through those massive oak doors was the sting of cold air rushing in behind me. Like the winter itself was trying to follow me inside. The house glowed with golden light crystal chandeliers spilling over polished floors. The sound of soft piano music floating through the air. Guests stood in glittering clusters, their laughter echoing under ceilings higher than any building I'd ever lived in. And then, just as quickly, the warmth was stripped away. Eyes turned, one after another, scanning me from head to toe. My coat was still damp from the icy drizzle outside. My shoes squeaked against the marble, and for a heartbeat, I felt as though I'd wandered into the wrong world. Entirely. It happened faster than I could prepare for. A woman in a shimmering silver gown, her voice as sharp as the glass she held, stepped toward me. Her gaze traveled down my simple dress as though it were an offense to the season. She didn't need to say much. Just the way she tilted her chin and dismissed me with a glance was enough to slice through whatever fragile confidence I had carried with me that evening. In that moment, I wasn't a guest. I was an intruder. I could hear the whispers circle around me like smoke light, poisonous, impossible to pin down. My hands trembled as I adjusted my purse, pretending to busy myself so I wouldn't have to meet anyone's stare. The chandelier above sparkled like falling stars. But instead of feeling magical, it felt cruel, throwing light on every flaw I wished I could hide. Inside, I burned, not just from the embarrassment, but from something deeper. I had prepared for this night, believing maybe I could belong here. Instead, I stood frozen in the doorway, humiliated before I'd even said a word. What I didn't know then, what none of them could have imagined, was that this night, the very night that began with my humiliation, would unravel in ways that would change everything. Most days, my life is quiet. Too quiet, some would probably say. The little apartment I moved into after my husband passed away holds more silence than I sometimes know what to do with. I keep myself busy in small ways, watering the plants, flipping through recipe books, stretching the pension check a little further than it was ever meant to go. It isn't glamorous, but it's mine. Frank has been gone for 5 years now. I still catch myself reaching across the bed in the middle of the night, expecting his hand to be there. Losing him meant losing not only my partner, but also the shield he gave me. From feeling small in a world that values wealth and appearances more than kindness or effort. My son, Daniel, has a good life. I remind myself of that often. He worked hard, became a doctor, and married into a family that seems pulled straight from glossy magazines. His wife, Caroline, is elegant in a way that makes me feel clumsy just standing beside her. Her family, the Whitfields, have never been cruel outright. But I've spent years reading between their polite smiles and the way they steer conversation away from me at dinner tables. So when Daniel called and said they wanted me to come to the Whitfields' annual Christmas party, I almost dropped the phone. For 3 years of marriage, Caroline barely acknowledged me beyond the required pleasantries. Why now? Why this year Daniel's voice had that nervous softness he always used when he was trying to cushion bad news? I could hear the tension underneath, the unspoken warning not to embarrass anyone. Still, I let myself feel a flicker of hope. Maybe this was finally my chance to belong. To show them that I wasn't just Daniel's mother from the other side of town. I told myself I'd prove worthy of their world, even if just for one evening. I spent the entire week preparing. I combed through racks at discount stores until I found a burgundy dress that looked more expensive than it was. I practiced small talk in the mirror, pretending I was part of conversations about travel or business topics that usually made me feel like a bystander. I even rehearsed how to answer questions about my simple apartment without sounding ashamed. The night before the party, I laid everything out carefully: the dress, the shoes that pinched my feet, the small purse that matched perfectly. I told myself this was my exam, my chance to pass into Daniel's new life. But beneath the hope, there was fear. Fear that no matter how polished I looked, they'd still see me as less than. As I set my alarm for 8 the next morning, my stomach twisted with nerves. I wanted so badly to belong. But some small voice whispered that I might be walking into a test I couldn't possibly pass. The morning of the party, I woke to the steady ping of ice against my windows. The forecast had warned of a winter storm, but I had brushed it aside, too focused on hair appointments and final dress fittings. By noon, the roads were slick, the sidewalks glazed in dangerous glass, and my carefully made plans were unraveling. The salon had lost power, the tailor couldn't finish my alterations, and I was left standing in my small bathroom, curling my own hair with trembling hands. By the time I slipped into the burgundy dress, I looked presentable, maybe even elegant from a distance, but I knew it wasn't the polished image I had imagined. Still, I was determined. I left at 1:30, giving myself plenty of time for the drive. The highway was slow but steady, cars moving like cautious dancers across lanes painted with slush. My heart pounded with every mile closer to the Whitfields' mansion. This was it, the night I would finally prove I belonged. And then, on the winding road leading up the hill toward their estate, I saw her. An older woman stood beside a sleek black sedan, the hood propped open, her coat already coated with ice crystals. No hat, no gloves, her silver hair whipped around in the wind. She looked calm, but there was a fragility in the way she braced herself against the car. For a moment, I thought about driving on. I was already running late. My shoes were pinching, my makeup was fading, and I could practically hear Caroline's sharp eyes waiting to dissect every detail of me. Stopping now meant arriving not just late, but soaked and rumpled. But I couldn't do it. I couldn't leave someone's mother or grandmother standing on a freezing roadside. I pulled over, my tires crunching against the ice, and stepped out. The wind hit me like knives, flattening my hair instantly. My coat soaked through within seconds. I peered at the engine, though truthfully, I had only a little knowledge. Frank had taught me the basics years ago: how to check a battery, how to listen for the difference between a dead alternator and simple corrosion. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Her battery terminals were covered in white buildup, the kind that kept a car from starting on cold mornings. I remembered Frank's old trick and asked if she had a bottle of cola in the car. To my surprise, she did. There I was, on the side of a frozen road, in my burgundy dress and heels, pouring soda onto an engine. Grease streaked the skirt, ice clung to my sleeves, and every part of me screamed that I was ruining the one chance I had to make a good impression. And yet helping her felt right. Family parties happen every year, but the chance to keep someone safe in a storm that couldn't wait. The car roared back to life after a tense silence. She turned to me then, eyes sharp, piercing blue, studying me as if she were seeing beyond the surface. She thanked me warmly, her voice calm, her presence commanding in a way that felt strangely familiar. It wasn't until I followed her taillights up the driveway of the Whitfield estate that realization hit me like a wave. This woman I had just rescued from the storm was not just another guest. She was Margaret Whitfield herself, the family's matriarch. And by the way, everyone spoke about her, the true force behind their fortune. By the time I reached the Whitfield estate, I was drenched and shivering. The long driveway shimmered with lights, every window glowing like a scene out of a Christmas movie. Valets hurried to open doors for guests stepping out of limousines in gowns that sparkled like jewels. And then there was me, pulling up in my modest sedan, my coat soaked, my hair limp, the hem of my dress stained from grease and slush. I caught sight of myself in the mirrored entryway as I stepped inside. My makeup had melted into uneven patches. My shoes squeaked against the marble floor, and every carefully rehearsed vision of fitting in dissolved in an instant. This wasn't how I had imagined my moment. The music didn't stop when I entered, but the conversations did. Heads turned, and the silence that followed seemed louder than the piano. Eyes swept over me, sharp and dismissive. Whispers floated like smoke from one cluster of guests to another. I felt the weight of every stare pressing down on me, as though my very presence was an offense to the perfection of their evening. Caroline's expression said it all. She approached, flawless in emerald silk. Her smile stretched tight as though it might crack if she had to hold it any longer. She fussed over my appearance just enough for the nearby crowd to hear, as if narrating my inadequacy to the room. My son stood beside her, his worry visible. But his silence cut deeper than words ever could. He didn't defend me. He didn't have to. The message was already clear I was an embarrassment. Then came the final blow. Caroline's father, Richard, stepped forward with his authoritative air, suggesting with polite words and a cold undertone that perhaps I should freshen up elsewhere. It was a dismissal disguised as courtesy, and it pierced me like glass. My cheeks burned, my throat tightened, and I was ready to nod, to retreat quietly and save everyone the discomfort of my presence. But before I could move, a voice cut through the air like a blade, calm, strong, and impossible to ignore. Margaret Whitfield, the matriarch herself, the very woman I had helped on the roadside less than an hour earlier, stepped into the center of the room. She spoke not with anger, but with authority that carried more weight than any raised voice could. She told the room what I had done, how I had stopped in the freezing rain to help her, how I had sacrificed my own appearance for the sake of a stranger. Her words silenced every whisper, her presence commanding the kind of respect that no one dared challenge. I stood frozen, tears stinging my eyes as the tide of judgment shifted. Where moments before I had been the object of pity and scorn, now I was someone worth noticing. The matriarch's defense didn't just protect me, it elevated me, turning humiliation into something else entirely. And I realized then that the night wasn't over. It was only beginning. After the silence settled, the atmosphere of the party shifted into something I could only describe as electric. Guests who just moments ago had turned their backs on me were now hanging on. Every word from Margaret Whitfield. She wasn't just defending me, she was dismantling the hierarchy of the entire room with calm, measured sentences that landed like hammer blows. I found myself standing a little taller, though I was still dripping onto their Persian rug, my ruined dress clinging to me. My son's eyes darted between me and the matriarch, confusion written across his face. Caroline's smile was tight, brittle, as though she was trying to contain her outrage. And Richard, Caroline's father, looked like a man suddenly stripped of authority. In his own home, Margaret's words carried not just defense, but something more deliberate. She spoke about values, about how rare it was to find someone willing to ruin their own evening for the sake of a stranger. She said that sacrifice and character had built the foundation of everything. The Whitfield name represented, though she stopped short, for the moment, of explaining what she really meant by that. Later, after dinner, when the guests had been herded into a grand library lined with floor-to-ceiling shelves and glowing with firelight, she turned the gathering into something I hadn't expected at all. It wasn't just small talk anymore. It was an unveiling. She told the story of Whitfield Industries. Everyone, including myself, had always believed it was her late husband's vision that he had been the architect of their wealth and influence. But as Margaret spoke, the truth spilled out like light through a cracked door. She had been the one who started it all. She had borrowed the first small loan, negotiated the first contracts, built the company brick by brick while raising a family. In the 60s, when women were told to stay silent, she had been the one burning midnight oil, running the numbers, knocking on doors. She had let her husband be the face of it, she explained, because it was easier in that era for men to be taken seriously. But make no mistake, it was her grit, her sacrifices, her refusal to accept limitations that had created the empire everyone in that room was now living off of. The room was stunned into silence. I looked around at faces pale with shock. Caroline's cheeks flushed red, her father's jaw clenched tight. My son looked like a man seeing his family's story rewritten in real time. And then Margaret did something even more shocking. She turned toward me. She said I had reminded her of the woman she used to be, the one willing to get her hands dirty, to put kindness above appearances, to solve problems with whatever tools were available. She spoke of how the family had lost those values over time, trading them for appearances and comfort. She said that by stopping on the roadside, by choosing a stranger over my own pride, I had shown her the essence of what built her legacy. I felt the heat rise in my chest as she announced, before everyone, that she wanted me to help her restore those values in the company. She described a role, a consulting position in community engagement, where I could bring the heart back into a business that had grown cold and distant. My knees nearly buckled at the weight of her words. Me, a woman who had spent years stretching a pension, cutting my own hair, shopping in discount stores, being offered a seat at the table of one of the wealthiest families in the state. I wanted to refuse, to laugh it off as impossible. But then I caught my son's expression. It wasn't embarrassment anymore. It was something else. Respect, pride, maybe even awe. I realized then that this wasn't about status or money. It was about being seen, truly seen for the first time in years. Not as a burden, not as an outsider, but as someone with worth. The Matriarch's revelation didn't just rewrite the history of the Whitfields. It rewrote my future. And as I stood in that magnificent library, under the watchful eyes of ancestors painted in oils and framed in gold, I knew my life had just changed forever. That night, as the fire crackled low in the Whitfield library and the crowd slowly dispersed, I found myself standing in a quiet corner, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Hours earlier, I had been rehearsing small talk in my mirror, worried that my modest dress would betray my humble life. Now, the matriarch of one of the wealthiest families in the state had lifted me from humiliation and placed me in a position of honor. It still didn't feel real. My ruined shoes, the streak of grease on my skirt, the mess of my hair. These had been symbols of shame when I walked in. Yet somehow, those same imperfections had become proof of character, evidence of what truly mattered. I caught my son watching me from across the room. His expression had shifted so many times that evening from tension to embarrassment to something that looked almost like awe. When our eyes met, he gave me the smallest nod, the kind a son gives when he finally sees his mother not just as family, but as a person worthy of respect. That single gesture was worth more to me than all the grandeur around us. Caroline avoided my gaze, though I noticed her forced smile falter whenever anyone brought up my name. Her father, Richard, kept his distance, but the stiffness in his jaw revealed more than words ever could. For the first time, They had been forced to see me differently, not as an unwelcome outsider, but as someone who had been recognized and championed by the one person whose opinion mattered more than theirs. As I stood there, I realized this night wasn't about the dress or the whispers or even the humiliation I had endured. It was about the way life has a way of turning in unexpected moments. One act of kindness, as small as pulling over on an icy road, had shifted the course of my life. I hadn't planned it. I hadn't sought a reward. And yet it had revealed truths long buried about the Whitfields, about myself, about what really lasts. Because in the end, appearances fade. Dresses tear, makeup smudges, fortunes rise and fall. What endures are the choices we make in the moments when no one is watching. Stopping to help a stranger may not look like much, but sometimes it's those unseen moments that echo the loudest. I thought of Frank then, how he had taught me little things like fixing a battery with cola, but also bigger things, like never walking past someone who needed help. Maybe that was his legacy living on through me. Maybe kindness, once sown, never truly disappears. Driving home later that night, I felt lighter than I had in years. Not because I had been offered a new role in their company, though that still left me astonished, but because I had been reminded of my own worth. I didn't need their chandeliers or fine gowns to prove my value. It had always been there, even when they couldn't see it. And so, if you're listening now, I want to leave you with this: never underestimate the weight of a kind act, even the smallest one. You may think no one notices, but life has a way of shining a light on truth at just the right moment. If this story touched you, I'd love for you to share your thoughts in the comments. Tell me about a time when kindness, yours or someone else's, changed the course of a day or even a life. And if you believe the world could use a little more authenticity, a little more compassion, I hope you'll like this video, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need a reminder today. Because appearances may dazzle for a moment, but kindness endures.